I just came back from vacation and I'm happy to report plenty of wow moments, like seeing singer Shamika Copeland in a free concert in a park. That was pretty cool and very memorable. But there were plenty of unwow moments as well. Moments that just went according to plan, provided some authentic connection, and creative positive impressions. Those little moments can make a major difference. And that is what the Unwow, your blueprint for experience design of all kinds, is all about. I take you through the different types of experiences, factors that influence experience, and the components of the experience engine so you can design better experiences. It also is chock full of examples from personal experience, industry cases, and even this podcast. So head to theunwow.com, provide your email, and stay on top of all the upcoming Unwow news and how you can contribute in the making of the Unwow. That's theunwow.com and enter your email to be part of the Unwow. Now, on to the show.
1, 2, 3.
Hi, I'm Gary David. Welcome to Experience by Design, the podcast where we explore experience designs of all kinds. Hello, experience designers and EXDers everywhere. I hope you are all doing well. I am back from vacation in Lake Placid, which I took with my kids, which doesn't really make it an actual vacation because there was no relaxation. It's more of a relocation, but with more spending. We just picked up from one place, went to another place, which added a lot more work for me in terms of entertaining them. But overall, I had a pretty good time. But now I feel like I need a vacation from my vacation. Instead of getting that, I came home to one of my dogs developing Lyme disease, which thankfully he is responding well to the medication $200 later and is getting along much better than he was 4 days ago. And also adding to my mental freak out is the fact that it's nearly August. How the year is more than half over is beyond me. I'm trying not to think about it because it's still technically July, but the end is near. And now that vacation is over and August is almost here, it also feels like the beginning of the new school year. And with that means a shifting in the kind of work that I'm doing. People think that, if you're a teacher or an educator, you get the summers off. That's not true. I've had a really productive summer of writing the Unwow. And now I get to continue my other kinds of work, which is hopefully educating young people and making an impression on their lives that they can carry forward. Wishful thinking, but without wishful thinking, what else do we have? I think I actually divide my life not into months, but phases of work, the rhythms and tempos of work. And probably you do too. We can think about our year in terms of which quarter we are in, the tempo of the projects we work on, the phases of required reports. Work has always dictated our time, or at least how we think about time, which speaks to the significance of work in our lives beyond the income it provides. Work is more than just income. It provides structure to who we are, a sense of who we are, and also defines how we think about our lives overall. Dr. Michael Lowenstein has spent his career understanding the impact of work and workplaces on employees, focusing on the relationship between employee experience and customer experience. I actually use his book, Employee Ambassadorship, in my employee experience course, which focuses on how to create cultures that turn employees into brand ambassadors. And by that, I mean his book focuses on that, not just my course. Or to put it more simply, what is the likelihood that your employees would recommend your company to others? I mean, think about that question for a second. Would your employees recommend working at your company or the place where you work? Are they ambassadors of your brand? He is working on a new book project and course framework with Tamara Cohen that further demonstrates the links between customer experience and employee experience, emphasizing that if you want to do well by your customers, you first have to do better by your employees. In this episode, Michael and I talk about the importance of stakeholder integration in your strategic planning, that you have to create alignment before taking action. Michael shares his experience working with organizations that prioritize both employees and customers, citing examples like MBNA America, Costco, and Market Basket. He explained how companies like Virgin, Baptist Healthcare, and Ritz-Carlton have successfully transformed their cultures to align internal and external focus, moving from employee satisfaction to engagement to commitment, and ultimately customer advocacy. We also compare different organizational models, including B corporations, private companies, and public companies, in terms of their effectiveness in fostering employee-customer linkages. I've personally known Michael for a very long time now, having done presentations and other events together talking about the connection between employee experience and customer experience. It was great to catch up with him, as well as capture his insights and his experiences and future endeavors on the podcast. Hope you enjoy it. One of the first questions I have is, what is a PhD in strategic planning and program management? How does that work? What do you study? What was your dissertation on? Did anybody read it? Do you still have it?
I still have it. People read it. And it was interesting. I mean, if I look at organizations like the Project Management Institute, for example, where they give accreditations in this, for all intents and purposes, when I was with it was a Grande École in France, which is now the Schema Business School. It was really training in pick an area of focus, pick an area that you think is important or is going to change and is going to emerge, and transition over time, and do a project there. Set it up. I mean, that was the dissertation. Set up the project, lay it out, and then kind of execute it and report on it and see where we come out. Now, my background, part of my background, just like Philip Kotler's, is in economics as well as total quality. So I go back into the 80s in total quality, and of course, one of my icons is W. Edwards Deming. And Deming was not only a total quality expert, of course, mostly working with companies in Japan and then the United States, but he was also kind of an aficionado of how marketing was going to evolve and corporate culture was going to evolve. And in one of his books, Out of the Crisis, I think 1982 or 1983, he said something that stuck with me for kind of all of my career. He said, when you look at organizations and roles within the organizations and outcomes that you're trying to produce, every employee in the company has one of two jobs. You either support the customer and provide value for the customer, or you support somebody and provide value to somebody who does.
Okay.
And his concluding sentence was, there are no other jobs. And I looked at that and I said, what does that mean?
Right.
What it means at the end of the day is linkage. I mean, how do you connect these groups? What I was finding the more I got into it, and then so starting with my doctorate, it kind of stayed with me all those years later. I worked on both sides of the desk. I mean, I was in strategic planning and I was in marketing research for a number of companies, including DuPont. And then later I moved to the other side of the desk and I was with GFK, which is now part of Ipsos. I was with Harris Interactive, which is now part of AC Nielsen. So, and I was a senior vice president for both. And then later on, I was an EVP for a smaller, although global market research and consulting company. But increasingly, my focus was on how do you connect these two key stakeholder groups? Because for most companies, that's either never considered, or if it's considered at all, it's only some groups like customer customer service and sales, and they connect because they're kind of natural groups. But what you find in most companies is siloing of operations and siloing of data and insights. And if you're going to truly optimize, again, we've been talking about how do you optimize, particularly as things evolve in customer experience, how do you optimize value? Well, again, I'm convinced that one of the key ways to do it, and the way that's most often overlooked, is, again, through linkage, integration, and alignment. That's where the opportunity is. And if I kind of move up to right around the millennium, one of my clients is a company that is paradigmatic still in all of this, and it's a company called Baptist Healthcare, located in Pensacola, Florida. They're in a highly competitive market. It's basically a military market, but they went through a 2-year, it was almost an odyssey. They brought in university professors who were kind of skilled in this, folks like you, and they had them as consultants. And Baptist, during the time that I worked with them and consulted with them in research and also training, they won the Malcolm Baldrige Award for total quality. Their level of employee turnover dropped dramatically. They were listed for the first time they were ever listed on the Fortune magazine 100 Best Companies to Work For in America, where there were no other healthcare companies listed. At that point, they were number 11, the first time they tried.
Gotcha.
Because of all of these changes. And, I was fortunate to work with a senior vice president of development there. She was a brilliant person, and really kind of spearheaded this along with the CEO. So I lived this, Gary, real time.
Right.
I watched it happen. And it kind of crystallized my thinking over what can be. Kind of along the way, I was exposed to MBNA America, which at the time was the second largest credit card issuer behind Citibank in the US. Citibank didn't lose employees. They had very low credit risk among their cardholders. They didn't lose cardholders. Their mantra, coming from the founder, the CEO, a guy by the name of Charles Cawley, was think of yourself as a customer. That was the watchword for the whole organization. You could see it on the walls. You could see it inscribed in the rugs. So I could find these organizations. That's why I like Costco today as well.
Right.
There are several organizations. It's not necessarily industry specific, because you can find it in Trader Joe's. You see it, I see it in Wegmans on the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
Their mantra is, employees first, customers second. You and I, you introduced me to Market Basket.
Right.
And Market Basket is just an iconic, wonderful case study of what the employees can do and what the customers can do on their behalf. So that's a great book and a great lesson. If I look at it on a larger scale, look at all the Virgin companies, 400 companies in Richard Branson's portfolio, and they all operate pretty much the same way, with this linkage and integration and alignment, where the employees, as Peter Senge identified, knowledge workers, they are assets. They are not costs. They are not expenses.
Right.
They are absolute participants in driving value. So that's kind of my platform. That's my soapbox.
That's a great soapbox. As a person who wasn't reared in business education, ironically, but has studied workplaces, it's always perhaps my naivete that I find it surprising companies don't think, number one, of their employees as human beings, right? And as their first customer, their internal customer. And also from a CX perspective, that companies don't necessarily prioritize customers. And again, even as I still say these words, I know it to be true, but I still have a hard time understanding it as being reality because it seems so counterintuitive to everything that I think a business should be about. Why is this still persisting to be the case in companies?
Well, it's a great question, and it's fundamental. Look at where employee engage, enablement, entitlement, capability. Where does it live in most companies? It lives within HR.
Right.
And HR, by and large, is very internally focused, whereas companies like Wegmans and Trader Joe's and Netflix and Delta Airlines and Baptist Healthcare are duly focused on internal and external. They understand that value is created on the inside and the outside of the organization. That, I've charted this out from a research perspective, consulting perspective, and an application perspective. It kind of goes from the 80s and a little bit earlier where companies were focused on employee satisfaction. And it's kind of, all right, it's the old Seshua Hayakawa thing. Are you happy in your work? Well, okay, you're forced to do something. This is what you do. You're chattel. You're a cost. You're an expense. Okay. Are you satisfied with that? Sure. Now you move up to engagement. And engagement, as you know, was kind of, I put quotes around this, invented by I think it was a professor of sociology, if I'm not mistaken, at Boston University. And for me, the seminal evaluation of engagement was done by the Conference Board around 2006. They couldn't find a definitive way to identify what engagement really meant.
Right.
So if you don't know what it really means, is it rational? Is it emotional? Is it some kind of combination or a hybrid? If you don't know what it is, how do you apply it? When I started looking at customer commitment, customer advocacy around 2004, 2005, with some other marketing scientists, and we literally came up with a framework for identifying it. Later on, then I started to leverage what I learned in customer advocacy and customer commitment to employees to create a framework to understand what's really driving behavior on behalf of creating customer value. So now, you can follow this path that goes from satisfaction to engagement to commitment and ultimately to customer advocacy. And when you and I were doing our webinars at InMoment, that's where the focus was. How does an organization like Virgin, all the Virgin companies, or Baptist Healthcare, or Delta, or Zappos, or Ritz-Carlton, how do these companies get to that point? What do they have to go through? Well, by and large, they'll go through some kind of an internal metamorphosis, like Ritz-Carlton and like Baptist Healthcare did. Before Horst Schulze, Ritz-Carlton was just another, high-end, hospitality company. Baptist Healthcare was just another, barely competitive healthcare organization. When Herb Kelleher founded Southwest Airlines, of course, it's changed, but he saw that if you bring employees and customers together in a novel, unique way that provides value for both, everybody's going to benefit. The investors are going to benefit. The customers, the employees, the whole organization will benefit. The culture will benefit. So again, there are these individuals and organizations that either began that way, like Southwest, or like Ritz-Carlton, evolved to become that way.
Right.
And Baptist Healthcare as well. So I've tried to build on and incorporate the learning that these companies have offered. Tamar, as you know, comes from a corporate background. And her background is perfect for this because it was in both HR and customer experience.
Right.
So, she has these internal perspectives that kind of transcend traditional thinking about HR. So we're trying to kind of, meld and merge all of that into creating this training program. So again, this is where the thinking comes from. And for me, it goes all the way back to Deming and just has kind of evolved over the years.
Well, you mentioned Southwest, and it also, people talk about, and I know in the white paper I read that you and Tamar Cohen have laid out and are pushing this notion of what is gained when we have this linkage. But I also think, in thinking about Southwest and even Boeing, what's lost, because you think about Southwest and all the issues they had with their logistics. A key part of that was somewhat mentioned but not emphasized was the loss of employee engagement in identifying opportunities to improve. We're going to take this out, and we're going to, leadership change, philosophy change. We're going to dictate the hubs, the computer systems, the networks without employee input. And it just fell apart.
Yeah.
Just totally fell apart.
It's a combination of their system, and how it differs from other airlines. That's first. And second, look at what they've done now with regard to the seating policy.
Right.
And it's a net negative, and it was all done to increase the revenue that they could get from checked bags. They've almost forced everybody to check bags. And what I consistently ask, it's amazing, and the reactions that I get on LinkedIn to this. When I see articles about this, what you just referenced, and kind of what they're going through currently, my sole question is, what would Herb think?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
What would Herb think? He had a concept in mind when he founded the company, and it has kind of negatively, to your point, it has negatively morphed in multiple ways, to the degree where employees are less of a factor than they were. It's detracting from employee value. It's detracting from customer value. And so when I look at companies that are doing, I can look at Delta within the airline industry because they're still practicing it and doing it well. But Southwest has to be removed from the list again because of the satirist Gene Shepard, who wrote A Christmas Story, and is famous for it. He used to call this creeping meatballism.
Creepy meatballism. Okay.
And I love the term because, how do you tear apart something that was working? And that's what's going on at Southwest. Other companies, if you look at retailers like Jamesway and Caldor and Kmart and Sears and on and on and on, they couldn't compete in a changing world. Southwest has figured out, well, we gotta soak the customer for as much as we can, and the employees become secondary, and we're kind of in the short-term creeping meatballism tactical world. You don't recover very well from this. Company's reputation and image are critical things. Look, just ask Wells Fargo. It's almost 10 years since their scandal, and they still haven't recovered. They're still turning over employees at a record rate. So, organizations. I'm also a believer that organizazations have a soul. MBNA and Charles Cawley had an absolute soul. Tony Hsieh and Zappos had an absolute soul.
Right.
And so, you can see that soul, it's colored by who it is. Tony Hsieh was a person of principle. Cawley was a person of principle. Herb Kelleher was a person, he liked fun, but he was a person of principle. Horst Schulze person of principle. That kind of background kind of gets embedded in the DNA of an organization. And companies, companies represent it, employees feel it. What you want is their commitment to it, their advocacy for it, and the same thing is true of customers. You can get it. You can get it if you're diligent, if you're disciplined. My work with Baptist Healthcare for 2+ years showed what discipline can get you, and intent. Now they're training. Baptist Healthcare, for example, is now training healthcare companies all over the country. They set up you're talking about leadership. They set up a leadership institute, and in that industry, it's desirable and needed, and they do a great job with it still. And it all came from the learnings that they got. So,
well, you call it creeping meatballism. Today, we might call it private equity, because
yeah.
Well, I mean, this idea, we were talking before we started recording about Hammer and Champy, and the idea of rethinking, or re-engineering, organizations, and the idea of total quality versus, gained efficiencies, and then losing people in that process, and private equity as well, whether private equity is involved in a hospital or a sports team, as we're seeing, that it's just numbers on a spreadsheet to maximize shareholder value and return on investment without any consideration of the people involved and the decline in the soul, but also the decline in the service as related to the decline in the soul as well.
Totally
and decline
agree.
in the product as well.
Totally agree. I mean, in a lot of companies, unfortunately, when you start peeling back the layers, what you're getting is engineering and plumbing and not architecture.
Right.
What are they set up for? What is their intent? Again, what is their purpose? One of the webinars that you and I did at In Moment had to do with Seth Godin's 2011 book on linchpin, on linchpins. How does all this connect? Purpose and culture, data, value creation, organizational setup, linkage and breaking down of silos operationally and from an insights perspective. He had like 5 different elements, 5 different pillars, if you like, for an organization to get to a point where everything inside is connected and focused on building business income, business outcomes, and growth. And most organizations don't have the will, they're too tactical, to follow that kind of a game plan. I was asked at one point, find me a metaphor. One of my metaphors was Jack Welch. I met him. I was fortunate to meet him. I was at a symposium some years ago, and he was on a panel, and I was in the front row, and I got to ask a question. My question was, who's most responsible for creating strategic value within an organization? He said, you can, his basis of comparison for all of this was look at professional sports, particularly football teams, and how football teams have to find the best players for the best positions, and also market, and also put a product on the field and all of that. And at the time that I was doing I think I was doing a podcast with somebody, I said, well, in Philadelphia, the year that they won the Super Bowl, it was and is Howie Roseman, he's kind of like the head of player personnel and also the general manager. He's the architect. They ain't the owner. The owner gives it to him. The owner is the CEO. Howie Roseman is the general manager, head of HR, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of a unicorn position. And he's responsible for everything. Managing the cap, man, now you're going through free agency at this time of the year. They're going to lose players. They're going to bring players in. How do you keep all of this balanced? How do you create a product and sustain a product that is good for the employees, is good for the fan base, is good for everything, and really drives business outcomes? It's so I always had a lot of respect for Jack Welch and that kind of thinking, and that was very insightful as far as I was concerned. It works pretty well.
You're thinking about the NFL, for instance, since you were mentioning it, I just looked it up because I wanted to make sure I got this right. That back in February 13th, we're recording this in March 2026, NFL wins grievance against NFL Players Association regarding report cards. That those player report cards that are done by the NFLPA, the Players Association, where they give out a survey to all the players in the league to evaluate their teams on a variety of different criteria. And by the way, the New England Patriots always score near the bottom, right? And the NFL the owners being embarrassed. When I say NFL, I'm saying NFL owners because they're one and the same thing, embarrassed by those report cards. And rather than taking it as an opportunity to fix, it's no, we want to suppress that data and not have it available in the public because we're embarrassed by some of the conditions that players have to operate under, including, paying for their own meals at the team facility or not being able to eat more than a limited amount, or the weight rooms or the flight or whatever it is, not having facilities for families during the games. And so I think it's this very emblem. We talk about a metaphor that the owners are like, you know what? We just don't want it to be published. So because we don't want to be known as cheapskates, we don't treat our players well.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's like kindergarten and grade school, and it's amazing that so many, and extend it to large organizations.
Right.
Most large organizations are kind of like that. It's kind of benign acceptance. Again, it's because of this narrow focus that HR has always had, looking at employees as checkers pieces or chess pieces that they can move around because they're costs. The whole thing, one of my arguments about engagement, the way that it has been practiced typically, I mean, for 20 plus years, is that it's about fit, alignment, right? And productivity on the part of the employees. That's it. Again, it fed into the whole idea of re-engineering, because how can we reduce it and still maintain the fit, alignment, and productivity that we want? And that was what was behind re-engineering. Okay, move forward. If now the paradigm for effectiveness and success has changed, and it's about creating value and employee commitment to customers and customers' commitment to the employer, then the goalposts have moved.
Right.
Ultimately have moved. So yeah, it's very, very true. It's very true. And so you can see it to a degree in professional sport. And look, frankly, that's part of, because large organizations are so difficult to move. This is kind of why we focused on SMBs. Now, there are exceptions to the rule. Baptist Healthcare is a pretty good sized company.
Mm-hmm.
To scale, obviously, the Virgin companies, a portfolio of 400 organizations. That's scale. Wegmans is not a small player.
Right.
There are companies where the scale can work, and Costco is huge. This is another one. So, Delta Airlines, same kind of thing. So it can scale, but it's not done without some effort, some investment, and most companies are kind of unwilling to go quite that far. But you're right, and it's all the profit motive tends to be kind of tactical and short term, and that's the way. I think one of the things that we've observed over the last number of years is the term of CEOs has gotten shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, because organizations have less tolerance for strategic investment, with now the possible exception of throwing big bucks at AI, and I'm seeing what comes out of the meat grinder.
Right.
So yeah, there are opportunities out there. Founders of organizations like Cawley and like Herb Kelleher, and folks who have come in, and Tony Hsieh at Zappos. And his own background was, he'd gone through 2 or 3 different companies, left a couple, sold a couple, and when Zappos was bought ultimately by Amazon, his deal with Jeff Bezos was, leave me alone.
Right.
I will sell my company to you if you leave the culture and the operation of the organization to me. You're buying our company because it represents value to Amazon's bottom line. If any of that is threatened, okay, we can discuss it. But for the present and for the future, until and unless that happens, hands off. So yeah, I mean, they wanted to maintain the culture. Culture is very important, and have done so, and to the betterment of all the constituents involved. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned a few times human resources, and people need to realize that human resources isn't just the name of the department, but a reflection of the philosophy of the organization towards its employees. They are human resources, not human beings.
Sure. Yeah, and it actually goes back to one of Tony Hsieh's quotes: "Brand is a lagging indicator of the culture."
Yeah.
So, what kind of a culture are you creating if HR has the entire responsibility for creating it and managing it? I was talking about unicorns a moment ago. One of the companies that I found is very interesting, that has a unicorn culture, is McCary Bank, that's based in Sydney, Australia. There's a single person who's responsible for HR, organizational culture, and customer experience.
Oh, wow.
I've never seen anything like that.
Right.
Ever. McCary's not a huge company, but they are global. And, there's a statement. The statement is, even in a highly regulated industry like retail banking, commercial banking, it can be done. You can create this linkage and alignment, and everyone, per Herb Kelleher's quote and Richard Branson's quote, everyone will benefit if you're able to do that. So there are possibilities. I mean, it's not without challenge. It's not without investment. It's not without some discipline, but you can create value add for all of these groups. There's no doubt employees, I think to your point, HR kind of keeps employees in certain slots, but employees want skin in the game. They want to be able to contribute, and they want to be able to get value for themselves. That's why you have to look at what's involved in employee experience. Is it just training? Is it enablement and empowerment? And in what form? And can they contribute? Go back to something that you said a little bit earlier about when you're referencing the NFL and their own player research. You look at most employee research, it's still satisfaction based. It's all about my job. Well, in work that I have done, particularly when I was at Beyond Philosophy, we started looking at a different kind of employer research. Yeah, we would do the basics in terms of job, but we also wanted to know, what's the likelihood that you would recommend your company's products and services to other people? What is the level of support that you get to providing value to customers? Half of the diagnostic questions that we would have in these studies would be about the degree to which employees are supported in providing value to customers. Almost unheard of in employee research, but very, very important. Another thing that I would do is what I would call, I've been doing it for years, something called mirroring research. When you conduct research with customers in terms of areas of value delivery, ask employees almost the same question. What do employees think of the service level that they're providing. What do they think in terms of product quality? How does that compare with what customers think? When you have perceptual gaps between the two sets of perceptions, and this is a model, you may
Right.
be familiar with the Serqual model that goes into the late 80s and it looked at perceptual gaps. This is one of them. The gaps between perceptions between employees and customers. If the gaps are significant and there are areas where friction exists that is damping down customer value delivery, now you have something that you can really prioritize and work on. Employees can help with that. If employees think they're doing a great job and customers think they're doing a terrible job in an area of importance, that's critical. Vice versa is also critical. So you can find that out, and it's easy to do. And yet, again, very few organizations do it when they're doing employee research. There's a lot of linkage and correlation, not real correlation analysis, but connection, let's say,
Right.
between VOC and BOE. And
Sounds like you just described higher education. In terms of that,
you would know better than
I do, but just in more in general education, because the gap between I do know a number of educators across different levels from K through 12, of course, obviously in higher ed, and that one thing that especially teachers today that leads to significant burnout is they don't feel supported. They feel completely cast adrift. And I was just talking to someone today about this, where I'm being asked to do more and more and more for my students, but yet I'm not getting any support for what I need, and just completely feeling, not thought of, and, as a complete afterthought in the pie that's being divided up about organizational concern and care, that the employees are not being considered at all.
Yeah, and you can expand that particularly to large organizations. I had a major electronics client where, for example, they thought they were doing a great job with employee training, and they had changed the model from one-to-one in-person training, where the employees got to directly interact with the instructor without a screen involved, or where the training was just going one way and coming at them, like watching QVC or Shopping Network. And they thought that was great. The organization, and I dealt with the HR folks and their training groups, and they thought this was great. I said, well, that's interesting. Have you asked employees what they think, and if they think this is being supportive, and if they are getting value from this and making them more connected to the organization and making them more effective in providing value to each other and to their customers? Oh, no, we haven't thought of that. Really?
Yeah.
So, again, a danger of kind of narrow thinking, very myopic thinking about what they're doing and where value really is. Ask, you got a customer. Think of yourself as a customer. In this case, think of yourself as an employee. The employees, particularly the younger employees, just hated it. You would think that, they're more in tune to electronic. They were not.
Right.
They wanted one-on-one. And they saw a lot more value in it, and they saw it as a reduction, a subtraction of the value that they have as employees. You don't think enough of me as an employee to give me one-on-one training. Now, I go back a number of years, and one of the early sets of training programs that I had was in writing, and I got it very early at DuPont, and it was one-on-one training by a guy who was a former newspaper reporter, and he took a 3-page memo of mine and cut it, trained me to cut it down to like one half-page paragraph. He cut
Right.
it down. He cut it down by like 5, 6. Lost no meaning. It was more effective. It was succinct. It was to the point. Lesson was never lost on me. You know, and you know, I wouldn't have been able to get that online because there was a lot of dialogue back and forth. A lot of Q. It was very Socratic. I mean, I had a lot of questions about, well, why this and why that and why. So he took all of his experience as a multi-decade newspaper reporter, and the name of the course was How to Write So People Will Understand You.
I wish some of my students would take that. It's an interesting element. I was at a fintech conference in November, and there was a lot of talk about digital first, especially around customer experience. And you know, one of the things is I was talking to these representatives from what we would call credit unions, what they call different names for over there. Yeah. It's like their demographic doesn't want digital first. You know, the companies might think about it as greater savings, greater efficiency, lower headcount, or tell whatever story they want about how it's going to help the customer. But the customers don't want digital first. They want digital intentional. They want digital when they want it, but they also want a person when they want that. And forcing people into a digital first framework is you're not doing that for your customers. You're doing it for you, but using your customers as the rationalization for the decision.
As is so often done. It's an economic first decision, which is fairly tactical and superficial. If your basis for decision making is kind of dually value and growth, then you will go, into more depth to try to understand what it is that the different constituent groups really need.
Right.
There are things that employees need, and there are things that customers need. And yours, what you just gave, is a great example. And it's analogous to the example that I had with this electronics company, where they made the decision. They didn't ask the employees what works for them. They just made an a priori decision that we are going to change the model for training because we think it's better to do electronic training.
Right.
And the employees did not.
Right.
So, and so what that started to do was diminish trust.
Sure.
It diminished the image and reputation inside and outside of the organization among employees. And, it was just all around not a great decision. It's very similar to the example that you just gave. So organizations, unfortunately, will tend to do things tactically. If they are like some of the paradigmatic companies that I've been mentioning, they will do a lot more in-depth thinking and study and evaluation of this kind of thing to make sure that they're making the best, most strategic decision for all of their constituents.
I wanted to read a quote. So, the white paper you shared with me, enterprise-wide customer experience, customer employee linkage and integration. Yeah. There's a great quote, and it made me think of something, and I'm going to read it, and then I'll tell you what I thought, what it brings to mind. And the quote is, "The erosion to social, emotional, and financial well-being have fundamentally altered our trust in core institutions. This underscores businesses' critical role in fostering more inclusive operations and cultures and contributing to a more trustworthy society. In response to this challenge, people increasingly turn to businesses and trusted brands for a sense of identity, security, and trust. Likewise, employees now look to their employers to provide a sense of security and value stability they can't locate elsewhere." And I love that quote. And one of the reasons I love that quote is that it makes me in some ways think about former patronage models that corporations had when they were intricately or intimately tied to a place. So I think about, the Brown Paper Company in Gorham and Berlin, New Hampshire, or other areas where the company really felt a commitment to make lives better through donations to the arts, parks and recreations, educational institutions, and the companies provided a pathway for building a life and a career. And there was this trust. It wasn't, it was still a family owned company, but it was still top down hierarchical, but there was a relationship. And now we don't see that in the same kind of way. And that trust is really diminished to almost be non-existent, where I have no commitment to you. You have no commitment to me. It's purely transactional. And as a result, we all lose out in the process.
True. Among big companies, you see it in relatively few. I mean, one for me is relatively close, and that's Subaru, which is in Camden, New Jersey. They have a very altruistic base, within the community. Kind of a parallel that I saw years ago. There's a company outside of Milwaukee, a high-end shoe company, footwear company, Allen Edmonds. You may be familiar with some of their products. They're very, very high quality. Outside of Milwaukee, that part of Wisconsin, a lot of footwear companies in those days, and they had major issues with equipment and fires and that sort of thing. And Allen Edmonds, when all that happened to other small footwear companies, pitched in. It was almost like an Amish model. And they helped these companies that were competitors of theirs, kind of in some cases, get back on their feet. That was, that's not a family orientation. That is a spread community organization kind of thing, where they're thinking as much of their fellows and their employees as they are of themselves. They would expect if something happened to their factories, that other organizations would kind of pitch into them. So yeah, and look, I mean, from what you described, it starts with this breakdown of trust. Again, I'll go back to Gene Shepard. It's kind of creeping meatballism. You're when you're focused on the short term and you don't recognize who employees and customers really are, that they're just kind of means to an end, that they're costs of doing business and that kind of thing, and you expect customers just to stay with you out of inertia. Well, this is kind of where there's a lot of challenge in the world of employee and customer experience yet to be overcome. Hopefully, with what we're doing, we'll contribute to dealing with some of that.
Well, that's the good news and bad news of this, is that the good news is that you're going to be relevant for a very long time. The bad news is that's because companies still fail to get it right.
Yeah. And when absolutely. And when there are so few companies that are really exceptional at doing this, I mean, you recognize that there's a long way to go. I created kind of a pathway model for this that goes from satisfaction to engagement, and what engagement doesn't provide you, to commitment to advocacy. And the whole notion of advocacy is, if you create it among employees and you create among employees and customers, basically then what you have is let's call it a trust account.
Right.
You create a trust account. Now your goal is to protect and build on that. Trust is not a true emotion, but it's kind of a headliner of emotion. To your point, is if it starts to degrade or erode, or entropy sets in, what a lot of organizations have found, like Southwest is finding now, like Wells Fargo found out, it's hard to get it back. It takes forever. It's like, what do they call it? The information on the internet. It's got a long tail. People forget. So the opportunity is there, but the investment and the discipline needs to accompany it, and particularly this kind of reconsideration of who employees are and what they represent in terms of value creation and knowledge. They're valuable. HR ought to be protecting all of that, not having to deal with high churn. It's obviously good for the culture, and it's good for the customer base.
I guess as a final question, do you know if there's been any studies done of how B corporations fare in terms of this linkage? And I mean, obviously, there's a bunch of criteria that they have to satisfy to become certified as a B Corp. But when we think about models of organizations, employee ownership, B corporations, how private companies that are family owned versus public companies, how do these different types of models fare in this linkage, or is there no discernible difference?
Well, that's why we look for paradigms. There is a difference.
Okay.
There is a difference. They build it into, I'll go back to MBNA. What Cawley did was build it into the operations and into the cultural DNA. One of the ways that I saw this model kind of play out was when I would take clients into their office building, their central building, which moved from Newark, Delaware to Wilmington. And you would go into this gigantic room where there would be, and this is kind of almost pre-computer, but not quite. If you were a vice president within MBNA, part of your job description is that 5 hours a month, you were to be on the phone with customers, cardholders, who were calling in with questions, and maybe they needed an extension of their credit, and you could pull up their history on your screen and make that determination within 15 minutes and not days. And the part of the reason for this is that embedded into the organizational DNA, they did not ever want any employees to be too distant from the customer and providing value to the customer. And what you find in too many organizations is distance, where employees, leave the touching of the customer to customer support, customer service, or sales. And again, I'll go way, way back to Deming. Everybody in the company has one of two jobs. You support the customer or you support somebody who does. There are no other jobs. That's why I always found that to be, such a fundamental truth. Most companies have gotten way, way, way far away from that. So to your question, and I hope it's a reasonable answer, the companies that have found the key to that lock have made it work. Now, in the case of Southwest, they had the key,
right,
and the key got lost somewhere,
right.
Once Herb Kelleher was no longer, involved in the organization. But, most companies that have had the key have stayed with it. I always like the mantra of Ritz-Carlton: ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. Right?
Yeah.
So, again, built into the culture, built into operations, built into information and insight sharing, built into, experience execution for both groups of constituents. That's kind of where it works. And to the bottom line to your question is, I haven't seen studies like that. And wouldn't it be valuable to have it?
Yeah, it would be.
Wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's another job that you have.
Okay.
I don't know like when you're going to stop, but you can't, because this still is an issue.
No. It's the old Satchel Paige thing. I don't stop because if I stop, something behind me will gain on me. And I don't need that. Well,
it's Michael. It's great to. I've known you for a long time, but it's great to get you on the podcast finally and talk about this work and your new iteration of your consulting around linkages, which is fantastic.
Thank you very much. Passion. It's my passion. It's my profession, and I'll keep at it.
I want to thank Michael Lowenstein for joining me to talk about customer experience, employee ambassadorship, stakeholder integration, and success stories. You can find out more about his work in the links in the show notes. You can also share feedback about this episode or any episode at feedback@experiencexdesign.com. Also, to stay on top of all of the Unwow news, head over to theunwow.com and provide your email. I'll make sure to keep you in the loop of all the news coming up and opportunities to even influence book content. So that's theunwow.com. Provide your email and I'll make sure to keep you informed and involved. Finally, as you get ready to plan your next corporate or other event for the upcoming year, what's left of it, or even next year, you can contact me, Gary David, to work with you around creating content to suit your needs, especially if that content is meant to unwow somebody. So head over to GaryConnects.com, check out my speaking profile, and contact me to have me come to your next corporate event, professional event, training, or other kind of event to help you create better experiences. And with that, as always, make sure you stay kind, stay safe, stay well, and stay right here for the next Experience by Design podcast. Bye.